So I recently finished my 4th playthrough of Elden Ring and my 3rd playthrough of the DLC, only kinda realizing this time that there are so many great bosses in this game. So let's go through my top 10 best ones in the entire game, including the DLC. I have a few criteria for what I think personally makes a boss good, but I reserve the right to completely disregard these and just say a boss is good because it's good if I feel like it. First is the fun factor, the most important one. This is also related to difficulty, it can't be too easy. Second is the design/coolness factor, probably the least important, but can still make a big difference. And the last for me is repeatability, which I think is incredibly important to a good boss fight. Do I feel like I can win every time once I've learned the fight or not? This kind of goes in line with fun, but still kinda not exactly the same thing. Before I start the list, I want to give a couple honorable mentions that just missed the top 10 but are still worth mentioning. My first one is Malekith the Black Blade. I'm sure this is one a lot of people expected to make the list, but I just hate the first phase way too much, and I think the destined death mechanic in phase 2 is a bit over the top. It's just extremely punishing for kind of no reason. And my second one is Radagon/Elden Beast. I think Radagon is an incredible fight until he starts teleporting all over the place, but my bigger issue is with the Elden Beast. That fight just takes way too damn long, and I start to get bored like halfway through. Give Elden Beast a major HP nerf, and that fight would be amazing. But with that out of the way, let's start the actual list. Number 10, Romina, Saint of the Bud. With FromSoft continuing the hot lady on top of a grotesque creature trope into the Elden Ring DLC, we were gifted with Romina, Saint of the Bud, who I think does the trope the best out of all of them. She has 3 main means of offense: a centipede head, a stinger, or whatever that is, and her spear. All 3 of these types of attacks are super well telegraphed, especially her slam attack, which has a little glow and an audio cue hinting at when you need to dodge, which I think is actually a great piece of design that more bosses should utilize. Her melee attacks are my favorite. All of them are super satisfying to dodge, especially the combo she does in the second phase that ends with the spin. Speaking of the second phase, that's where my one small issue lies. Her second phase transition AoE attack kinda comes out of nowhere and is very hard to react to in time, so you kinda just end up taking quite a bit of damage. She also gains Scarlet Rot buildup on a few attacks, which is something I really didn't like at first, but now I don't think it's that big of a problem. But she also gains this attack where you basically just have to back up and wait until you can attack her again. I'm just not the biggest fan of these get off me attacks, but I still have a great deal of fun every time I fight her, which is enough for her to crack the top 10 for me. Number 9, Radahn, Consort of Miquella. Yeah, this is gonna piss some people off, but whatever. This is quite possibly the most polarizing boss FromSoft has ever made. The final boss of possibly the most polarizing DLC FromSoft has ever made. I'll start off with what I don't like, since that's easier to talk about. Yes, the X/ move is complete BS and nigh impossible to dodge consistently. Yes, the second phase is pretty overtuned as far as damage level. I don't think these issues ruin the fight though. I mean, they definitely keep him from higher heights, but they're not deal breakers. I think the first phase is mostly amazing outside of that one X/ move, but everything else I'd say is very learnable and very consistent. I'd even say it's very fun. Getting a handle on his delays and dodging him flawlessly is incredibly satisfying. Then at about 60% HP, he switches into second phase. In the second phase, not much changes, or everything changes, depending on how you look at it. The same moves are still there, Miquella just follows them up with holy beams of light that feel unfair the first few attempts. You're most safe from the beams of light when you just fight him like you did in phase 1. That's the biggest tip I would give to anyone struggling here, just don't overthink it. You can fight him the same way as phase 1 for the majority of phase 2. I do think the giant AoE is a bit dumb because the room for error is so small, but he does it like twice in the entire fight, and one of those times is right after switching phases, at least most of the time. I guess I'll cover the clone attacks next. If he dashes to the right, your right that is, he'll dash at you with one clone and then the second one will be real. To dodge this, roll backwards. Don't roll sideways, don't roll forwards, roll backwards twice. You will dodge it. If he raises himself in the air suddenly, start running right and roll on the 4th slam. That will dodge him and then just react to what he does after that. When he does the meteor attack in phase 2, roll it and run as far away as you can. Wait until the last second to jump to the right to avoid the meteors and keep running right, then roll on the 5th slam. Then wait a beat, then roll to dodge the AoE follow-up. The second phase of this fight is extremely difficult and will take time and effort to learn and master, but I promise you it is worth it for how enjoyable this fight can be. I don't mention OSTs too much, but this one I thought was actually very memorable and fittingly climactic. Due to the immense difficulty of this fight, I can't help but get this adrenaline rush every time I fight him, knowing that my attempt could be over with one mistake, which I absolutely love. This fight makes you feel like a warrior taking down a god. Against all odds, you overcame that challenge, which is what Souls games are all about. Number 8, Godric the Grafted. I think this fight is an amazing introduction to the intricacy and creativity of Elden Ring boss design. Along with Margit, Godric teaches you that in this game, positioning in boss fights matters a lot more than in other Souls games. For example, whenever Godric does this wind charge up move, if you're far away from him, he'll just throw a couple of tracking wind projectiles. But if you're up close, he'll jump in the air and do a slam attack instead. Therefore, I always try to stay close when he does that so I can get the more favorable attack. I really like stuff like that, where you can choose whichever outcome you like better. Once you get his health down to about half, he cleaves off his left hand and carves it into the neck of a dragon corpse, bringing the head of the dragon back to life on his left hand, which seems unlikely. This phase is largely the same, but he adds fire to almost everything. It should be noted at the very start of this phase, you can run up to him and get in like 3 to 5 hits depending on your weapon speed. Also watch out for when he does his fire-breathing lawnmower attack and run behind him to dodge it, since that can melt you if you still have low HP by this point. Overall, this fight delivers great spectacle, fun, and consistency that I really appreciate. It may not be a super demanding boss, but it still holds a special place in my heart. Number 7, Starscourge Radahn. What's the opposite of grew on me? Shrunk on me? Yeah, let's go with that. This boss kinda shrunk on me. I still think it's great, obviously, but he used to be my favorite boss in the base game. I mean, it's not that this fight necessarily got worse, I think I just realized other bosses were better. Let's start off with what makes this boss so good. The build-up. You've heard Radahn's name many times before even stepping foot in Redmane Castle. His name echoes through the lands between, being regarded as the mightiest demigod of them all. So naturally, when you get around to fighting him, you can't help but get a bit nervous thinking about the pandemonium this fight will likely provide. Then you allow Elden Gale to paint you the full picture. General Radahn is cursed ever to wander. With his wits long gone, he spends his time feasting on the corpses of former friends and foes alike. I know I'm using a lot of direct quotes here, but it's really the coolest way to describe it. This cutscene lets you know that even though Radahn is nowhere near his prime at this point, he's still a force to be reckoned with. So much so that you're intended to summon about 10 warriors to help you take down this beast of a deity. Like, even if the fight was kinda trash at this point, the build-up and spectacle alone would have given this at least an honorable mention. Luckily though, the fight is good. Radahn uses a nice combination of melee and gravity spell attacks, including a gravity pull he can perform at any range, keeping you on your toes. He also has one combo that I think is super satisfying to dodge. I'll show it on screen now. It sucks that I usually fight this guy when I'm pretty over-leveled. My next playthrough I'm definitely fighting him extremely early to really appreciate his moveset. His phase 2 transition is simply iconic. He leaps into the sky, leaving you wondering where he went for a few seconds before you see what looks like a meteor hurtling towards you, which leaves a huge explosion on impact. You should be well into the fight at that point, so just keep doing what you were doing and soon you'll take down my favorite character in Elden Ring. Number 6, Baal the Dread. If you asked me 2 weeks ago if this boss would place in my top 10, I would have told you hell no, he's unfair garbage. But after my most recent playthrough, I'm starting to understand the hype he gets. I mean, I still have my issues with the fight, it's not like he's perfect. If he was, he would be number 1. First, I'm just going to say this is likely the most visually stunning boss of FromSoft's career, at least in the second phase. The first phase is still cool, but it was slightly embarrassing getting my ass kicked by a heavily injured dragon. His attacks are mostly melee, only breathing fire every once in a while. I wish he left more of an opening after these fire-breathing attacks, though. There's also this head ram attack that's impossible for me to react to, which is why I wish it was consistent when it happened, but it's not, so you basically just have to guess when it's gonna happen. Once you chop him down to a bit over half health, he does an AoE explosion you need to run away from if you value your life, but what you get as a reward for avoiding that is the coolest cinematic moment in the entire game, and it's not even a cinematic. Baal grows back and spreads his wings wide, then flies around the arena chucking fireballs I never quite figured out how to completely dodge, but now he has power over fire and lightning, so best believe you're getting 2-shot. But what I love about the fight as a whole is how survivable it is when you know what you're doing. It's super consistent and repeatable, which is incredibly satisfying, going minutes without taking damage without even realizing. As mentioned before, I feel like he should have more safe openings considering how huge his health pool is. Like, if he had double the amount of safe openings, I could see me placing him at number 1. But I could also see this boss getting naturally better the more I fight him. Regardless, Baal delivers a cinematic spectacle along with an incredibly enjoyable fight that just misses the top 5. Number 5, Godfrey, First Elden Lord. The real one, not the gold one you fight before Morgott. That was an entree, but this is the main course, baby. I think the first phase of this fight is the perfect example of a great Elden Ring boss. Godfrey wields an axe twice the size of you and swings it around like it's a fly swatter. Dodging these attacks feels so good. You'll need to watch out for when he stomps, because those can stagger you into getting hit by the following axe swing. These stomps can either be rolled or jumped over, but I prefer jumping over since I think that takes less stamina and the timing is more forgiving. Also, watch out for a certain axe attack, you need to back up afterwards to avoid the following AoE. I literally feel like I can fight this first phase for an hour and not get bored. Now once you get him low enough, he'll rip off the lion on his back like a complete animal abuser, then acts like he's a complete Giga Chad just because he's shirtless now, like chill. This phase isn't nearly as good, but it can still be fun. He basically fights like he's in the WWE. He'll try to grab you over and over again in between punches and stomps. This phase has a version of the AoE as well, but the radius is a lot bigger, so you have to start running away pretty much immediately. I used to think the second phase ruined the fight, but it's not that bad. It can also feel pretty intense, which if done right, I can enjoy. We're now in the territory of absolute top tier fights, like if any of these top 5 are your number 1, you're based as hell. Number 4, Melania, Blade of Mikola. Come on guys, it's been over 2 years, can we just accept that this boss is amazing and at launch everybody just sucked at it? Like I do get why some people don't like this fight, I just don't get why some people still don't like this fight. I will never not love Melania, no matter how many times I fight her and no matter how many times I fall to her blade. I do fight Melania differently than every other boss, like I play a lot more passive, and that's pretty much just because of the fact that Waterfall could go off at any time, at least any time below 75-ish% health. Her 3-hit slash I think is one of the single best attacks in the game. It's basically her bread and butter attack that can combo into a couple different attacks. Like if you play patiently, she's surprisingly survivable. Way more survivable than something like Malekith, I would argue. She is extremely punishing if you ever mess up, but I don't think that's inherently a bad thing. I've always thought of her high damage and lifesteal as a way to teach you to fight her more patiently. I explain this to point out the difference between Melania being extremely punishing and Malekith being extremely punishing. Melania is extremely punishing for a reason, to teach you a lesson about her fight. Malekith is extremely punishing because why? It's lore accurate? Like, it just doesn't make sense. Anyway, back to the actual fight. If I were to complain about something, I wish the fight was a bit shorter, like if both phases were on 1 health bar instead of 2. Oh yeah, I haven't talked about phase 2. Not much changes. I mean, she now has Scarlet Rot build-up, but if you manage to get inflicted with Scarlet Rot during this fight without dying, I might find that impressive. She also gains a couple more attacks. One is a Scarlet Flower, which basically just gives you about a 7-second break. The other major new attack is the Clone attack, which I'm actually more scared of than Waterfowl. I just find it less consistent to dodge, but I managed to get lucky here. If nothing else, battling against a blind swordswoman and getting your ass kicked is something I can't help but find cool. Melania is a brutal teacher in the moment, but one you're thankful for when you think back to her in your older years. I guess that's a weird analogy, but it's true. Number 3, Mohg, Lord of Blood. So in this footage, I'm around a level 50 character using a +4 Ice Rind Hatchet and 6 +3 flasks, meaning I do very low damage, and I can mess up a maximum of 4 to 5 times. I did this so I could actually learn Mohg's moveset and not just flounder my way through the fight like I had done my previous playthroughs. And what can I say, I am so glad I did. It took about an hour, and I learned the ins and outs of everything he can do, and after doing that, I can confidently say this fight is absolutely incredible. Everything about it, the moveset is incredibly fun, his design is insanely cool, and everything he does is super consistent. In that hour or so of attempts, I never once had a death that I didn't think was 100% my fault. His attacks are incredibly delayed, but after a while you don't even view them as delayed anymore. He's a lot like Nameless King in that way. On top of this, his openings are completely fair and he has plenty. You can even find openings within his attacks depending on how fast your weapon is. A lot of people tend to complain about his knee heal attack, which is fair, but I can definitely see the idea. I'm not so much of a fan of the damage on you, but I do like that he heals before phase 2. This is because second phases that occur halfway through a boss health bar are typically a lot shorter because you can also deal damage during the transition, so by the time they're in phase 2 they have like a third of their health left. I think FromSoft just really wanted to make sure you had to fight phase 2 for longer than like 20 seconds. I love that because the second phase of this fight is one of the best boss phases in the entire game. Him growing wings and starting to fly during attacks is an incredible sight. There's also one particular attack I want to point out as particularly great. In the first phase he does an attack where he stabs his trident into the ground before pulling it out a second later. In the second phase he can do the same attack, but when he pulls the trident out of the ground an explosion goes with it. The timing is the exact same, so you're rewarded for paying attention to all the timings in the first phase. I do have one small complaint about this fight, which is in the form of a get off me attack, which is the Blood Rain, which I personally just don't like, as I mentioned with Romina. Regardless, I think this fight is near perfect and I love it to death, which makes it all the more impressive that there are still 2 spots left. Number 2, Midra, Lord of Frenzied Flame. Taking the silver medal for boss quality is the Lord of Frenzied Flame. This fight starts with you bullying a midget with a sword going through his entire body. You think you're in for an easy and quick win until he says, "I have endured more than enough." and rips the sword straight from his skull, King Arthur style, which by the way, despite being a huge fan of Mortal Kombat, I'm glad they didn't actually show. But then it's revealed that this guy is the Lord of Frenzied Flame, and the actual fight begins. I think this is arguably the most fair boss in this entire game. All of his attacks make complete sense and are completely intuitive to dodge, maybe with the exception of the spinny attack, but you can just guess how to roll and be completely fine. Or just duck under it if you're one of those people that looks up how to fight bosses, because I never would have found this on my own. Much like Moog, I find Midra very similar to Nameless King, delayed timings and super hard hits, but once you get them down, he's incredibly fun. In his second phase, or technically third phase, he gains a couple more fiery attacks and a combo that I think is incredibly fun to dodge. If you ever mess up and need to heal, you need to fight for an opening, which I like a lot. You cannot just run away and heal. He'll heal cancel you to oblivion if you try that. So you need to just not lose your cool and keep dodging him up close like normal. Then instead of attacking him in one of your openings, go for a heal. I know it can hurt to lose a damage opening, but it's better than dying and having to restart the whole thing. In my most recent playthrough, I beat Midra first try and got hit literally twice the entire attempt, which goes to show how consistent he is. I absolutely love this fight from beginning to end. It's an absolute blast every single time. But even the embodiment of chaos can't outdo my pick for the best boss in the entirety of Elden Ring. Number 1, Messmer the Impaler.
Those stripped of the grace of gold shall all meet death. In the embrace of Messmer's flame.
So the poster boy for the DLC turned out to be the best boss in the DLC, and not only in the DLC, but in the entire game. Where do I even start with this fight? Well, I was surprised to find him so early into the DLC, that's for sure. I thought he would be like the final boss, which looking back was a bit dumb to think, honestly. Like, they wouldn't spoil the final boss in the very first trailer. They've never done that. But learning this boss was an absolute treat. I loved every minute of it. Learning every intricacy and nuance to his attacks and combos I thought was incredibly fun. His bread and butter is a thrust performed after tossing fire into the air, which can lead to a few different variations of a similar combo. He can either do an all-stab combo, go into a slash, or do a stab/drag-stab combo, which is my personal favorite. But also if he ever does a slow slash in that combo, he'll always follow it up with the drag attack. But if he does the quick slash, he'll never follow it up, giving you a damage opening. I really like when you're rewarded for paying attention to stuff like that. Outside of this combo chain, he has a couple special moves, I'll call them. The first is Messmer's Assault, which apparently I dodge differently than everyone else, but I find my way the most fun, so whatever. And the second is a spinny move that's probably his most unintuitive move to dodge. I couldn't figure it out my first playthrough, but now I can dodge it most of the time. Once you get him down to below 50% health, my favorite phase transition cutscene in the game will play. He rips out his eye, which again they don't show, good, and then he shatters it. At birth, being the son of Radagon and Marika, he was cursed with an abyssal serpent, and Marika replaced one of his eyes with a seal to keep the serpent back. So now he becomes one with his curse, as he says one of the coldest lines in the game.
Soon tarnished. Wilt thou be taken in the jaws of the abyssal serpent, shorn of light?
I still repeat that in my head at least 3 times a day, it's just so damn cool. So in this phase he keeps a lot of the same attacks, but now he has a handful of snake attacks that can be pretty dangerous. His most notable one is the one where he lifts himself in the air and summons several snakes to try to bite you to death. I recommend running far away from this because then you only have to worry about a couple of the snakes and himself to fully dodge it. Everything about this fight just flows so incredibly well, and I would genuinely call it a perfect fight. He's also just challenging enough to be incredibly engaging, but not so much that it feels dumb, which is a trap some of the DLC bosses fall into. Yes, I'm talking about that one. I'm sorry she didn't make the list, maybe I just have to fight her more. Messmer the Impaler is the best boss in Elden Ring and a top 5 FromSoft boss of all time. If we get another DLC after Shadow of the Erdtree, I'm very curious to see if they can top this. But for now, Messmer is peak Elden Ring. So there's my list. I'm intrigued to see what you guys thought of it. If you want to talk about any of the bosses that weren't on here or anything else related to Elden Ring, I read every comment I get, so feel free. I feel like this video will either get like 50 views or like 5,000, so we'll see what happens, I guess. But yeah, that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.